Good afternoon. Welcome to this week's edition of the Risk Safeguard Advantage podcast. I'm John Bielek, your host. As promised, I'm here with two safety whizzes, Matt Leonard, Nathan Daniel, here to talk to you today about the challenges of keeping your workers safe. Matt, say hello.
Hi, John. Nice to be here.
Nathan?
John, it's a pleasure to be here today.
Great to have you both in the same place. I'm looking forward to today. Gentlemen, as we know and what we see every day, keeping workers safe is as paramount as ever, but it's as challenging as ever. Matt, why don't you walk us through briefly your prior life to Sinclair and some of the things you're seeing in today's environment in terms of keeping workers safe?
I've been in the safety and risk management field for about 25 years, working for different types of organizations, from general industry to construction. Spent a lot of years in the construction side of things, and the biggest changes I've seen that we're looking at is in safety is the mental health of the employees and fatigue and everything that's taken place in the last year. That's probably the biggest challenge I think that employers faced. They have also the lack of employees, so you got employees that are with you doing more.
Great, thank you, Matt. And Nathan, you've been somewhat removed for quite a while, but prior to Sinclair, why don't you talk about your previous life and then what you've been doing here over the last couple decades?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. So, John's right. My history is actually on the construction side of the industry for many years, running a large program on the Northeast corridor. So, and again, though I've been removed for a while, I still see from all the clients that I do touch today that as we move post the pandemic, there are a lot of things that are affecting the way that construction companies or manufacturers have and the way that their employees are reacting to their personal and work situations that are causing a lot of stressors that have impacted every aspect of what happens in the safety field.
Great. You know, last week we talked about employee burnout, employee fatigue. Employees are tired, business owners are tired, there's a shortage of workers, there's a shortage of drivers out there. And I just have a simple question for both of you. Do you envy any safety directors right now?
Absolutely not. Their job is tough, and it's gotten a lot tougher over the last year.
How about you?
I would concur with that. It's a tough field to be in. You know, at one point it was just about one aspect of safety compliance, and now it's taken on so many other avenues and different things that have to be contemplated in their field.
Absolutely. And you know, when we talk about changes getting thrown at employers, and obviously COVID-19 was a huge one with its own safety ramifications. And now we're dealing with a new administration, one that's signaled it's going to be tougher with disciplinary enforcement arms of the government, OSHA, MSHA, DOT. So now we're seeing employers that are just getting squeezed in every direction. The supply chains are challenging, the workers are challenging, now the government's becoming challenging. And I think, Matt, something you said in the monologue to open up is the mental health of employees is challenging every industry, and it's challenging every employer in unique ways, to the point that business owners almost have to become psychologists. What do you say to that?
Well, I definitely agree with that. And when you look at the shortage of workers, it's so critical to keep the workers that you currently have healthy and safe. So you've got to put some programs in place that, one, give a potential to see if there's an employee that's having a problem, and then two, have a solution for them.
Perfect. And Nate, what would you care to add to that, or add any additional comments to that?
No, I think Matt's exactly right. I think having programs in place to deal with the fatigue and the crisis that employees are having to return back to work for whatever the situation be at that employer. Employers can't just see it as a standard, so having individualistic programs to kind of address a multitude of issues is a critical way to keep employees happy in the current work environment.
Right. And last week, unfortunately, marked the anniversary of the Big Blue Crane accident with the baseball stadium. And a statement that came out of that accident is, don't ever let your schedule dictate your safety. Unfortunately, right now, with the shortage of workers and the shortage of supplies, we're seeing contractors all over the country, unfortunately, feeling they have to rush, they have to do things differently because of the challenges they're facing. What do we expect from a construction accident perspective this year in the upcoming season, gentlemen?
Well, one thing that I see is what you mentioned earlier, John, was OSHA. OSHA is going to ramp up. They're going to be a lot more involved. You're going to see a lot more inspections. You're also going to see, and it's not a political statement, but you're going to see with this new administration is going to be a lot harder on businesses That means the inspections are gonna be stronger, there's gonna be more of them, the fines are gonna be greater. And then you've also seen recently with 2 business owners, one in Massachusetts and one in Colorado, that was actually sentenced to jail. And when that happens, it's not just OSHA, but when workers get hurt or get killed, the business owners can be held responsible. We're seeing that. And not only with OSHA, not only with jail time, but now you're opening up for major lawsuits, including punitive damages. So one of these situations, the owner is actually being sued personally, and the judge has allowed that. So that's something that business owners have to be aware of.
And you know, you once had a line that I loved, and I've seen you give in front of trainings and in front of groups. Who will put you out of business, Matt Leonard?
It won't be OSHA, it'll be the lawyers. And anyone who watches television, you'll see those commercials repeated over and over again.
And Nate, you know, prior to Sinclair, you worked in one of the most dangerous industries in the country as their safety director, overseeing 700 people. What are some things that you see 20 years ago to today, fast forward to today, that remain as challenges, and what are you seeing some of the new challenges out there?
I think one of the challenges we had back then is one that still is posed today, but its context has changed, and that's presenteeism. Having employees be accountable internally to what you're doing as an employer is really critical, but with all the other mental stressors that are out there today that are taking their presenteeism away from what they should be focusing on, which is their job and being safe, that's really hard for a safety director or an owner to assess that, to determine how do I put programs in place to address that presenteeism. But that is just so critical in today's environment, being sure that the employer has a presentee program, that their employees are engaged in not only the work, but their mental health, because that is really a driving force into the future to make sure that not only employees happy, but they're satisfied and that they can do their job safely and be accountable internally to what they're doing for that employer.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, we're seeing all sorts of headlines about variants ticking up around the country, and we know that the summer is going to go by in the blink of an eye, and that means your workforce's children are going to be back in school. There's going to be distractions there. There's going to be distractions at home. Frankly, it's already been a long year and a half now, and it's important to understand all this stuff, because as these distractions come, it means your employees may not be on the ball, whether they're in your factory, in your truck, on the job site. And we could read you all sorts of statistics all day long about distracted workers, tired workers, what that means for how they are. But ultimately, it means they're not going to be at their best. So if they're not looking out for themselves, you as their employer need to look out, because you want them to go home in the condition they arrived. You want them to go home to their families. Safety leadership. What do you think about that term, Matt? Anything that you would recommend right now for employers in terms of safety leadership, best practices?
Well, obviously, if you're going to have a good safety program, and when you ask a lot of business owners, they'll point to their mod. Our mod's really good. Well, that's terrific. That's what you did yesterday. What are you doing now? How engaged is the owners and the business leaders of your organization driving down safety? Don't look at your mod only. There's other ways of doing it. That's what you did in the past. What are you doing now? And do you know how to measure that? Do you know how to measure whether or not you have a safe company today?
Perfect, thank you. And Nate, as we talk about emerging risk, we mentioned this morning when we met the implementation of recreational marijuana laws in this part of the country, Connecticut being the most recent, but every surrounding state, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, they all have their own versions of this stuff. Why don't you talk about that briefly, what that means for employers, and more importantly, the keeping their employees safe?
Well, I think the implications of the recreational marijuana in any state is going to be far-reaching, and especially for employers, because that poses a lot of new challenges for an employer when trying to provide a work-safe environment, because a lot of jobs that are out there are difficult enough, and now you're adding another layer of complexity with either medical marijuana or the recreational marijuana, and now employers have to figure out how they're going to navigate these waters. And what makes it really hard is every state, as you indicated, is individual to their rules. Well, now you've got multiple states. So if you have employees in multiple states, you have to have multiple jurisdictions, multiple guidelines. And so I think this is going to create a whole other level of not only compliance, but from an exposure aspect, because the way you treat a Connecticut employee in relation to this will be different than the way you treat a Massachusetts employee. And I think that employers have to get ahead of this and not be behind this. There are certainly things as these rules have come out that employers can do to get in front of their programs. And that comes back to what Matt was speaking about, their policies and engaging, not what was done in the past, but being current and right on the moment with getting their policies up to speed, because as these things come forward, it isn't something you're going to be able to catch up to. You need to be in front of it to really be able to control the exposure that it's going to represent.
Perfect. Speaking of being in front of things, Matt, you recently spoke about serious injury prevention practice. How many near misses are taking place every day, and how many of them are actually getting reported and followed up on at the employer level?
Well, John, I'm glad you asked that question, because it was what I was mentioning before. When you talk about safety with a lot of safety professionals and also business owners, they go back to their mod, and that's the question I ask. You'll know one of the things that you'll know is if you have a good safety program that you're getting a lot of those. You're getting a lot of near miss reports, and then you're breaking them down to what we call pre-SIFs, which is serious injuries and fatalities. So you can have an accident, same accident, one's a pre-SIF and one isn't. You need to focus on the pre-SIFs. That's one example of a good safety program. There's probably 7 or 8 more that we can come out, look at a business owner, see what they're doing, implement that stuff in there so that whatever they're lacking, that they will have an excellent safety program that's current.
Great, great. And Nate, on the compliance side, we see aggressive administration. We have already talked about that a little bit today. What recommendations would you make to employers as a general compliance recommendation, knowing that this administration is going to treat safety differently, going to treat compliance differently? Why don't you take it away with that?
I think we've kind of been alluding to it this whole time, is that employers that are waiting to be reactionary, whether it be on their accidents or whether it be on their mental status of their employees, any employer that is going to wait till everything's after, that's not going to lead themselves to a productive work environment that is safe for their employees. And today it is set up to be so complex, whether we're talking recreational marijuana or we're talking the stress or we're talking the fatigue or a proactive safety program. All of that comes down to understanding that as management, we have a significant ownership over our employees and trying to provide that safe work environment. And it's a difficult task to do because it is so broad now. It's not as narrow as it once was. And there's a lot of facets that come in. So I guess my parting words would be, safety companies or employers should understand that safety is a vital part of doing business. It is not an afterthought. It is part of doing what they do. And in fact, it needs to be a forethought, and they need to pre-plan their thought process, and everything that they do at some point has to revolve around the employees and the safety of not only the business, but their employees and everyone in between.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I can tell you, sitting in front of a business owner over an insurance negotiation is never a pleasant experience. However, I would take that any day of the week versus sitting with a business owner who just lost a worker or an employee. Those are the worst phone calls. Those are the worst experiences. It takes years off business owners' lives, changes lives forever, let alone the families that lose someone who gets in their car to go to work and never comes home. That's why these two gentlemen are sitting here. We want to help you prevent that happening. The likelihood of it happening is increased. We could be reading statistics about how construction accidents are up, how fatigued workers are causing more accidents. We're not going to do that today. I can tell you the risk is there. And like Nathan said, what's so important right now is that you try and get out ahead of this stuff. If you're waiting until you have a problem, whether it's on the safety side or the insurance side, which by the way are correlated, it's too late. And we want to prevent that from happening, which is why we talk to you every week. I told you last week I want to give you an advantage heading into the second half of 2021 and beyond. Those who gather up the energy, because guess what, business owners, we know you're tired right now too. We know running a business is not necessarily fun these days. But you need to gather up the energy to talk with folks like Nathan and Matt and myself. Get out ahead of these things before they become a problem, and you will have an advantage over your average competitors. I promise you, I guarantee you that. Right now, any company that needs a hand up, we're here to help you. Even just get the conversation started. And we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to take some questions and anything that you're thinking of. But I can tell you the dangers are real. And those employers that care about their employees are going to get out ahead of this and we'd love to help you. So, Matt, Nathan, thank you for being on the podcast this week. It's been a pleasure. Do this again. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
Great.
And most importantly, stay safe, stay well, take care. Have a good week.